There are 8.2 billion people on this planet right now. 8.2 billion heartbeats, 8.2 billion stories. 8.2 billion people waking up this morning and moving through their day. And out of all of them, you are the one who stopped. You are the one who found this message. You are the one sitting here, reading or listening, with something pulling at you from the inside that you cannot quite name, but cannot ignore either. That is not a coincidence. That is not the algorithm. That is something far older and far more precise than any machine could manufacture. You, beloved and chosen one, were not designed to blend in. You were never meant to disappear into the crowd, to nod along, to shrink yourself down until you fit the space someone else decided was appropriate for you. There has always been something different about you, something that made you stand out even when you were trying your hardest not to. People have called it intensity. They have called it sensitivity. They have called it being too much, or not enough, or simply difficult to understand. But what they were actually encountering, without having the language for it, was the signature of someone who carries a specific frequency that most people will never vibrate at. Think about the last few weeks of your life. Think about the moments that felt heavier than they should have, the nights that went longer than planned, the questions that kept circling back, no matter how many times you thought you had answered them. Think about the dreams that felt more real than waking life, the ones where you were standing somewhere important, where something was being handed to you or shown to you, and you woke up and it was on the tip of your awareness, but you could not hold on to it. Think about the moments in an ordinary conversation where something someone said landed differently for you than it did for everyone else in the room, because you heard the layer beneath the words. These are not random experiences. These are not symptoms of something wrong with you. These are signs. And the chosen one does not receive the same signs as everyone else, because the chosen one is not walking the same path as everyone else. Here are the markers that will tell you whether you are truly one of the ones this message was sent for. First, your dreams have been getting clearer and more urgent in the past season of your life. Not more chaotic, but more pointed, as though something is trying to communicate with you during the hours when your logical mind finally steps aside. Second, you have been experiencing a frustration that does not have a clean explanation, a low hum of restlessness that sits just below the surface, a feeling that you are waiting for something you cannot name but deeply know is coming. Third, you have been sensing that certain relationships, certain environments, certain chapters of your life no longer fit the person you are becoming, and that discomfort is growing rather than fading. Fourth, you have been receiving the same message or the same theme from completely unrelated sources. A book, a conversation, a lyric, a moment of silence, and it keeps saying the same thing to you as though the universe is underlining a sentence it needs you to read. Fifth, there is a calling inside you that has survived every disappointment, every delay, every moment where you tried to talk yourself out of believing it, and it is still there, quieter perhaps, but still breathing. If you recognized yourself in any of those descriptions, then I need you to understand something about this moment. You did not find this message. This message found you. And the fact that it found you today, at this specific crossing point in your life, is not a small thing. Heaven does not operate on coincidence. The chosen one does not stumble into their awakening by accident. There is a precision to the timing that your human mind may not be able to fully grasp yet, but your spirit already knows. Your spirit was already leaning toward this before you ever pressed play or began to read the first word. There are people who live their entire lives and never hear someone say what I am about to say to you. There are people who carry their calling silently to the end, never knowing it had a name, never knowing there were others who shared the ache of it. You are not going to be one of those people. Not because you are better than them, but because you showed up. You are here. And that showing up, that single act of choosing to be present for this message on this day, is already evidence that something in you has been activated that cannot be put back to sleep. You are an earth angel. Not a metaphor, not a poetic title, but a functional description of what you are and what you carry. You were placed here with a specific assignment, a specific set of gifts that were calibrated for this exact moment in history. The world is not waiting for a perfect version of you. The world is waiting for the version of you that stops apologizing for taking up space. You have not been overlooked. You have not been forgotten. You have not been sitting in the wilderness of your life because heaven ran out of plans for you. You have been positioned. And there's a difference between being overlooked and being positioned that we are going to spend real time in together, because understanding that difference will change the way you breathe. The season of waiting has not paused. It is ended. There is something that happens to the chosen one in the long middle of their journey that nobody talks about honestly enough. It is not the dramatic dark night of the soul that sounds almost beautiful when you describe it later. It is not the cinematic moment of crisis that makes for a compelling story. It is something quieter and more erosive than that. It is the slow accumulation of ordinary days that feel slightly wrong. The way a shoe that almost fits will eventually blister the heel. And if you have been living inside that feeling, if you have been waking up and moving through your hours with the sense that something is off, but you cannot point to exactly what, then I want you to know that I am not going to move past that too quickly. You deserve to have it named before we move forward. There are 4 signs that tell me you are in the middle of what I call the appointed season, and I want to walk through each one slowly. Because the chosen one, in this particular chapter of their life, often cannot see themselves clearly. They are too close to it. The first sign is the wave of grief that arrives without warning. You are doing something completely ordinary. Washing dishes, driving to work, sitting in a meeting that has nothing to do with anything personal, and suddenly there is a heaviness in your chest that you cannot explain. It is not sadness about the present moment. It is something older, something that feels like mourning. But you cannot identify what exactly you are mourning. Sometimes it arrives as a memory of a younger version of yourself. The one who had not yet learned to be careful, who had not yet experienced the particular disappointments that taught you to hold your hopes at arm's length. That grief is real. It is not a malfunction. It is the chosen one's spirit, acknowledging the weight of the journey it has been carrying. The second sign is that the places and people that used to feel like home have begun to feel like spaces you are visiting, rather than spaces you belong to. This is one of the most disorienting experiences a chosen one can have, because there is nothing obviously wrong. The people are the same people. The environments are the same environments. But something has shifted inside you, and now when you sit in those familiar rooms, you feel a distance that was not there before, a slight wrongness. Like a frequency mismatch that nobody else in the room can hear, but you cannot tune out. You may have started making excuses to leave gatherings earlier. You may have noticed yourself going quieter in conversations that used to feel easy. This is not antisocial behavior. This is the chosen one's spirit recognizing that they are being prepared for spaces they have not yet entered, and the old spaces, no matter how beloved, can no longer fully contain who they are becoming. The third sign is the recurring dream. Not necessarily the same dream in its literal details, but the same dream in its emotional architecture. You are standing at a door that will not open, or you are in a hallway that keeps extending, or you are trying to reach something or someone, and the distance between you never closes, no matter how fast you move. Or you keep returning to a house in your dreams that is both familiar and strange, a house that has rooms you have never entered, rooms behind, doors that are always just slightly out of reach. These dreams are not your subconscious producing random imagery. These are the language of the spirit speaking to the parts of you that your waking logic will not allow to simply receive a message. The door in your dream is not locked. It has never been locked. You have been standing in front of it trying to pick a lock that was never there. The fourth sign is the convergence of messages. You hear a song lyric and it stops you. The next day, someone in a conversation you were not even fully paying attention to says a phrase that echoes the lyric. 2 days later, you open something at random, and there it is again, the same idea, the same theme, arriving from a completely unrelated source. This is the universe not being subtle anymore. This is whatever you believe guides the larger story of your life, turning up the volume, because the whispers were not landing. The chosen ones at this stage of their journey needs to understand that when the same message keeps arriving through different doors, it is not a coincidence to be cataloged. It is a directive to be acted upon. Now I want to talk about what the season has cost you, because I am not willing to skip that part. There is a version of this kind of message that moves very quickly from naming the pain to reframing it. And I understand why, but because the reframe feels good, it offers relief. It gives the pain a purpose. But if we move to the reframe before we have actually sat in the room of the real experience, the reframe becomes a bypass rather than a breakthrough. So let us sit here for a moment. Let us actually acknowledge what has happened to you. The waiting has taken things. It has taken sleep from you on nights when you needed to be rested, and instead you lay there in the dark, with your thoughts moving in circles that had no exit. It has taken the easy confidence you once had, or maybe the confidence you watched others carry while you wondered why it did not feel that accessible for you. It has given you a particular kind of loneliness that is not about being surrounded by people or not being surrounded by people, because you have experienced both, and the loneliness follows you into the crowded room as easily as it sits with you in the quiet house. It is the loneliness of feeling fundamentally unseen, of performing a version of yourself that everyone around you accepts while the deeper version of you watches from somewhere just behind your eyes and wonders if it will ever get to step fully into the light. The waiting has given you a specific kind of self-doubt that is different from ordinary insecurity. Ordinary insecurity says, I am not good enough. The self-doubt of the chosen one in their long season says something more confusing and more painful than that. It says, I know there is something here, I can feel it, but I have been waiting long enough that I am starting to wonder if I imagined the whole thing. That is the cruelest kind of doubt, because it does not attack your competence. It attacks your perception of reality. It makes you question not just your abilities, but your most fundamental instincts. I want you to hear this very clearly. There is a difference between being overlooked and being positioned. The person who has been overlooked has been missed. Someone responsible for seeing them failed to do their job, and they were passed by. That is a painful and real experience, and it happens. But that is not what has been happening to you. The chosen one who is positioned has been placed somewhere with intention, the way a seed is placed in soil rather than scattered on pavement. The seed in the soil is not visible. It is underground. To someone walking by, there is nothing there. But underground, something extraordinary is happening. Structure is forming. Root systems are developing that will eventually allow the plant to grow to heights that would have been impossible without that unseen underground work. You have not been in the waiting room of your destiny. You have been in the preparation room. And preparation rooms do not have windows, because if you could see the whole picture of what was being built, you would try to rush it, and the rushing would compromise the structure. But I also want to say this, because I believe it needs to be said without any softening of the edges. The pain of the preparation room is real. The loneliness of developing underground, while others are already in full bloom, is real. The exhaustion of sustaining faith through a long season without visible evidence is one of the most demanding things a human being can do. And you have been doing it. You have been showing up for a story you could not see the full shape of, sustaining belief in. Something that had not yet materialized, carrying a knowing that you could not prove to anyone around you, sometimes could barely prove to yourself. That is not weakness. That is one of the most extraordinary forms of strength that exists. The people who have not walked through a long-appointed season do not understand this. They see the surface of your life, and they offer advice that makes sense for someone who is simply stuck. Practical advice, logical advice, advice that assumes the problem is effort or strategy or mindset. And you have tried all of it. You have been disciplined and you have been strategic, and you have worked on your mindset, and you have also had seasons where you could not manage any of that, and you were simply surviving, and you felt guilty about the surviving seasons because you thought you were supposed to be doing more. I want to release you from that guilt right now. The chosen one in the wilderness is not failing when they are surviving. They are enduring, and endurance is not a lesser form of faith. It is faith in its most refined and costly form. You have not been misunderstood because you are too complicated. You have been misunderstood because you are too deep for a context that was never designed to hold your full depth. That is not your failure. That is simply a geography problem, and the geography is about to change. I want to invite you now to do something small but meaningful. If any part of what I have said in these last several minutes has landed in a place inside you that felt like recognition, like someone finally putting language to something you have been holding alone, then I want you to type the words "I see it" in the comments below. Not because it proves anything to me, but because the act of naming your recognition is itself a form of declaration. And chosen ones at this stage of their journey need to practice making declarations, even small ones, even quiet ones, because the voice that has gone silent through the long season of self-protection needs to remember what it sounds like when it speaks the truth. Type "I see it" if this is landing for you. And while you do, I want to ask you one more thing. If this message is finding you at exactly the right moment, if you feel in your spirit that someone else in your life needs to hear these words, then share it. Not with everyone, but with the one person who comes to mind right now, the one whose face appeared in your thoughts somewhere in the last few minutes of listening. They did not appear by accident. Your instinct about who needs this is part of the same frequency we have been talking about. Trust it. And if you have not yet subscribed, let this be the moment you do, because what is coming in the next sections of this message is the part where we stop naming the season and start navigating it together. You are not alone in this room. You have never been alone in this room. Before we go any further, I want to give you something practical. Because one of the things I know about the chosen one in this season is that hearing beautiful words about your destiny can feel like standing outside a restaurant, looking at a menu through the glass. It looks nourishing. You can almost taste it. But there is a pane of glass between you and the actual meal. So what I want to do right now is open the door and invite you inside. I want to give you something you can actually do. Something that fits inside the ordinary architecture of your day. Something that does not require you to have a quiet house or a free afternoon or a spiritual practice. You have been meaning to start for the last 3 years. This is what I call the threshold protocol, and the reason I am giving it that name is important. A threshold is not a destination. A threshold is the point of crossing. It is the line between one state and another, between what was and what is becoming. You are already standing at a threshold. The protocol is simply a way of helping your nervous system, your mind, and your spirit all agree on that fact at the same time. Because when all three of those systems come into alignment, something shifts that cannot be manufactured by willpower or positive thinking alone. The threshold protocol has 3 steps. And I need you to understand before we begin that these steps are not complicated. They are designed to be done anywhere, in a car, in a bathroom, in the 60 seconds before a meeting starts, in the dark of a room at 2 in the morning when sleep will not come. The chosen one in the long season often rejects tools that feel too simple, because the depth of what they have been carrying makes them suspicious of anything that does not match the weight of the experience. I am asking you to set that suspicion aside, not because simple means shallow, but because precision is not the same as complexity. A single key can open a door that no amount of force ever could. Step 1 is this. I want you to think of one thing, just one, that you are grateful it did not work out. Not grateful in the performative way, not the version of gratitude where you force yourself to find the silver lining before you have actually processed the cloud. I mean genuine relief. I mean the thing that, when you are honest with yourself in the quietest moments, you can acknowledge would have locked you into a version of your life that was not the right shape for who you are. Maybe it was a relationship that ended in a way that felt like destruction at the time. But looking back, even with all the grief of it, you can see that staying would have required you to become someone smaller than you are meant to be. Maybe it was a job opportunity that did not come through, a door that stayed closed when you knocked, and at the time it felt like rejection. But something in that closed door eventually redirected you toward an experience, a skill, a relationship, version of yourself that the open door would never have led you to. Maybe it was something even simpler than that. Maybe it was a plan that fell apart on a Tuesday and made you furious, but the falling apart of that plan put you somewhere else on a Wednesday that mattered more than you realized until much later. I need you to find that thing and hold it for a moment. Not to perform gratitude, not to rush toward the lesson, but simply to let your system register the truth that not every closed door was a punishment. Some closed doors were protection. Some closed doors were precision. Your spirit has been working with information that your conscious mind did not have access to, and the evidence of that collaboration is the life you are currently standing inside. With all its frustrations and all its unfinished business and all its unexpected survivals. Take 30 seconds with that. Just 30 seconds. Find the one thing and let the relief of it be real. Step 2 is a declaration. And I want to explain what I mean by declaration, because I am not asking you to repeat something you do not believe in order to convince yourself through repetition. I am not interested in affirmations that float on the surface of a deeper current of doubt. What I am asking for is something more honest than that, and ultimately more powerful. I want you to declare what you know is true in this exact moment, even if it coexists with confusion, even if it sits beside uncertainty, even if you cannot see the full evidence for it yet. The declaration is this, and I want you to say it in whatever way feels true for your own language, your own faith, your own understanding of the larger story of your life. You say, I am not behind, I am not forgotten, I am not a mistake, I am positioned, and the season I am in has a purpose that I do not have to fully understand in order to fully receive. You do not have to shout it. You do not have to perform it. You can say it quietly, under your breath, while you are sitting in traffic or standing in a line. You can write it down on a piece of paper and leave it somewhere. You will see it in the morning. The chosen one in the long season has been speaking a very particular language to themselves for a very long time, a language of doubt, of self-questioning, of waiting for external evidence before granting themselves the internal permission to believe. This declaration is a practice in reversing that sequence. It is a practice in speaking the truth before the proof arrives, which is precisely the posture that allows the proof to find its way to you. And step 3 is the one I want you to carry with you most carefully, because it is the one that is going to serve as a bridge between everything we have been talking about and something I want to share with you very shortly that has changed the experience of this season for thousands of people who were sitting exactly where you are sitting right now. Step 3 is 7 minutes of intentional silence. Not meditation. If that word carries weight, you do not want to carry. Not prayer. If prayer feels like a practice that requires more than you have available right now. Simply 7 minutes where you set down the inputs, where you close the tabs, where you stop the scrolling, where you let the noise that has been filling your hours step back for just 7 minutes, and you sit in the quiet with yourself. You do not have to think the right thoughts during those 7 minutes. You do not have to feel anything specific. You do not have to arrive at an insight or a resolution. You simply have to be present in the silence without immediately filling it. I am going to tell you why 7 minutes specifically, and why this particular window of time is not arbitrary, and why the research around what happens in the brain during even brief periods of intentional silence is something that every chosen one in a long season needs to understand. But I want to lay one more layer down first, because the silence is not just a relaxation technique. It is a frequency practice, and to understand why that matters, you have to understand something about what is actually happening inside the chosen one's brain during the long season of waiting, and why that specific experience has a specific neurological signature, and why that signature can be deliberately and gently shifted. The human brain has different states that researchers measure as frequencies. The same way sound has frequencies, the same way light has frequencies. When you are in ordinary alert consciousness, the kind you use to drive and work and manage the logistics of your day, your brain is running primarily in what researchers call beta waves. Beta is functional. Beta gets things done. But beta is also the state where the inner critic lives, where the comparison mind runs its calculations, where the accumulated weight of disappointment registers most heavily. Beta is where most people in the long season spend the majority of their waking hours, not because they are doing anything wrong, but because the demands of survival require it. But there is another state, one that children access naturally and effortlessly, one that is associated with creativity, with intuitive knowing, with the sense of flow that the chosen one catches glimpses of in their best moments, the moments when something moves through them that feels larger than their ordinary self. Researchers call this the theta state, and it operates at a frequency between 4 and 8 cycles per second. Theta is where learning deepens, where insight arrives, where the wall between the conscious and the intuitive thins, enough to allow information to pass through in both directions. And then there is the state that sits above theta, the one associated with what researchers describe as moments of sudden clarity, of breakthrough cognition, of the kind of thinking that connects distant ideas into a single, illuminating pattern. They call this the gamma state. And here is what the research actually shows, not in theoretical terms, but in measurable, documented, reproducible terms. Gamma activity is significantly higher in experienced meditators, in individuals who report consistent states of peak performance, and in people who describe regular experiences of what we might call spiritual clarity or heightened intuitive awareness. The chosen one is not imagining the frequency they carry. There is a measurable neurological correlate to the experience they are describing. The 7 minutes of silence that I am asking you to practice in step 3 of the threshold protocol is not arbitrary. It is the minimum effective window that allows the brain to begin shifting out of the dominant beta state and into the more receptive theta range. 7 minutes is not a long time. It is shorter than most commutes. It is shorter than most meal preparations. It is shorter than the average shower. But in those 7 minutes, if you sit in genuine intentional quiet, without inputs competing for your neural bandwidth, your brain begins to naturally synchronize toward a slower, deeper frequency. And what I want to share with you next, which grows directly out of this 7-minute practice and amplifies it in a way that has to be experienced, rather than simply described, is something that a neuroscientist named Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years of his research career developing. Dr. Rivers was trained at MIT, and his work eventually brought him into collaborations with NASA researchers who were studying the cognitive performance of individuals under extreme conditions. What they discovered in the course of that research, and what Dr. Rivers spent the subsequent decades refining into a form that ordinary people could access in the ordinary circumstances of their ordinary lives, is the foundation of what we are going to talk about in the next section of this message. I am raising this here at the end of the 3rd step, not to interrupt the practice, but to complete it. Because the 7 minutes of silence that step 3 asks of you is not just a breathing exercise. It is a preparation. It is your nervous system learning the address of a place it is about to be invited to visit more fully. And when you understand the science of what is available to you on the other side of that silence, the practice stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like coming home. So before we move forward, I want you to do one thing. If you have been following along, if the 3 steps of the threshold protocol feel like something real you can actually hold and carry into the rest of your day, type the words "I am ready" in the comments below. Not as a performance, but as a commitment to yourself. The chosen one in this season has spent a long time waiting for permission from sources outside themselves. This is a practice in giving yourself that permission directly. Type "I am ready" and let the comment be a record of the moment you decided to stop waiting for the silence to find you and started choosing it yourself. There is a reason that the chosen one has always felt like they were tuned to a different station than everyone around them. There is a reason that the insights arrive for you at odd hours, that the connections you make between ideas feel less like logic and more like recognition, that you have always sensed something moving beneath the surface of ordinary experience that most people seem content to leave unnamed. You have probably spent a significant portion of your life wondering if that difference was a liability, wondering if the sensitivity and the depth and the frequency of your inner experience was something to be managed rather than something to be developed. I want to tell you now, with the backing of actual research and actual science, that what you have been carrying is not a burden. It is a signal. And the signal has a name. Researchers in cognitive neuroscience have been studying high-performing individuals for decades, and what the data consistently shows is that the people who describe experiences of profound creativity, of breakthrough insight, of what athletes call the zone, and artists call flow, and spiritual traditions call grace, share a measurable neurological characteristic. Their brains, in those peak moments, are generating significantly elevated gamma wave activity. Gamma waves operate at the highest frequencies of any brainwave state, above 40 cycles per second, and they are associated with kind of concognin that integrates information from across the entire brain simultaneously, the kind of thinking that does not feel like thinking at all, but feels more like receiving thing. The chosen one does not simply feel different. At the neurological level, in the moments when they are most fully themselves, they genuinely are different. The frequency they carry is not metaphorical. It is measurable. But here is what the research also shows, and this is the part that matters most to you in this specific season of your life. The gamma state is not a fixed trait that some people have and others do not. It is a state that can be accessed, developed, and sustained, and the pathway into that state runs directly through the theta frequency that we talked about in the last section, the slower, deeper brain state that children access naturally, that adults tend to drift away from as the weight of responsibility and the noise of ordinary life accumulates over years and decades. The chosen one who has been in a long season of waiting has, often without realizing it, been locked primarily in beta, the high alert state of survival and management, and has been cut off from the very frequencies that would allow them to access the clarity, the creativity, and the intuitive knowing that are their most natural and most powerful resources. This is where the work of Dr. James Rivers becomes not just interesting but personally relevant to the exact situation you are in right now. Dr. Rivers is a neuroscientist whose academic training was at MIT, one of the most rigorous research environments in the world for the study of human cognition. His career eventually brought him into collaboration with researchers connected to NASA, where the study of human performance under extreme and unusual conditions generated data that simply was not available in conventional laboratory settings. What Dr. Rivers and his colleagues discovered over more than 30 years of dedicated research was both simpler and more profound than they initially expected. The brain, they found, does not resist shifting into higher performance states when it is given the right auditory input. The brain, in fact, is remarkably responsive to sound. It has a natural tendency to synchronize its own electrical activity with rhythmic patterns in the external environment, a phenomenon researchers call brainwave entrainment. The mechanism works like this. When you hear a specific frequency through one ear and a slightly different frequency through the other ear, your brain does something remarkable. It does not simply process two separate sounds. It perceives the mathematical difference between those two frequencies as a third tone, a tone that does not actually exist in the physical audio, but is generated entirely within your own neural architecture. And your brain, having generated this internal tone, then begins to synchronize its own electrical activity toward that frequency. This is not a theory. This is a documented neurological process that has been studied and replicated across multiple research contexts. It is called the binaural beat effect, and it is the foundation of the technology that Dr. Rivers spent three decades refining into a form that is precise enough and accessible enough for anyone to use in the context of their ordinary life. The Genius Wave is the result of that 30 years of work. It is a 7-minute audio track that uses precisely calibrated sound frequencies, including binaural beats and what researchers call isochronic tones, to guide your brain gently and naturally from the beta state, where it spends most of its waking hours, into the theta and gamma states where your most profound resources live. 7 minutes. That is the duration. Not because Dr. Rivers was trying to make it convenient, though the convenience is real, but because 7 minutes is the minimum effective window that his research identified for producing a measurable and meaningful shift in brainwave activity, without overstimulating the neural system or creating the kind of fatigue that longer sessions can produce. It is not a shortcut. It is a precision calibration. I want to tell you about a woman named Sarah. Sarah came to the Genius Wave in a season of her life that she later described to Dr. Rivers as the longest winter she had ever known. She had been working in the same position for 6 years, watching opportunities that felt meant for her go to people she knew, with absolute certainty, were not operating at the depth she was. She had done the internal work. She had read the books, attended the seminars, worked with coaches, and nothing seemed to shift the fundamental sense that she was standing just outside the room where her actual life was happening. She told Dr. Rivers that when she first heard about a 7-minute audio track that was supposed to change her brain, she almost did not try it. It sounded too simple for the size of the problem. But she was also tired enough that the simplicity was its own kind of argument. 3 weeks after she began using the Genius Wave consistently, she described something shifting in the way she moved through her days. Not dramatically, not in a way that made a good story at dinner parties, but in the way that actually matters, the internal way. Decisions that had felt impossible became clear. Conversations that had felt like walls became doorways, and 6 weeks after she started, the opportunity she had been waiting for arrived in a form she had not anticipated and would not have recognized if she had still been operating from the foggy, depleted beta state that the Genius Wave had gently walked her out of. There is also a man named Daniel who used the Genius Wave during a period of significant financial pressure, the kind of pressure that does not just stress the mind, but alters the quality of thinking available to you. Because chronic stress physically changes the neural architecture of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, creativity, and long-term planning. Daniel told the research team that within the first 10 days, he was sleeping differently. And the sleeping differently meant he was waking differently. And the waking differently meant that, by mid-morning, he was accessing a quality of thinking he had not had available to him in years. He said the ideas were not louder, they were clearer. And clarity, in the right season, is worth more than volume. I know that some of you listening to this right now are feeling something that sounds like this. $39 is not nothing. Not where I am right now. Not in this season. And I want to sit with that for a moment before I tell you anything else, because that response is not just valid, it is wise. You have been in a season that has required you to be careful, and careful with resources is not a lack of faith, it is stewardship. So I am not going to dismiss that hesitation or rush past it. What I am going to say is this. The Genius Wave is normally priced at $49. Through the link that is pinned in the comment section below this message, it is available today for $39. And it comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee that is unconditional. Not a complicated return process. Not a customer service experience that requires you to fight for what was promised. If you use the Genius Wave for 90 days and something in your experience does not shift in a way that feels meaningful and real, you get your money back. The entire $39, no argument. That guarantee exists because Dr. Rivers built this technology on research, not on hope. And research does not need a hard sell. It needs a fair trial. I also need to say something that matters for your protection. There are versions of this product circulating online that are not the genius wave created by Dr. Rivers and his team. They use similar language and similar packaging, and they will not give you what the genuine product delivers, because the precision of the frequency calibration is the entire point. And that precision cannot be replicated by someone who did not spend 30 years developing it. The only safe place to access the genuine genius wave is through the link in the pinned comment below this video. That is the only link I will ever share. That is the only source I trust. Please do not let someone else's imitation of this technology be the reason you decide the genuine version did not work. And finally, the pricing and the guarantee that I have just described are not permanent. The $39 access point and the current availability of the discount are limited, both by time and by the number of licenses Dr. Rivers has authorized at this price. I do not say that to manufacture a feeling of urgency that is not real. I say it because I would not forgive myself if you came back tomorrow ready to take the step and found that the window had closed. The chosen one in this season does not need another closed door. The one that is open right now, the one in the pinned comment below, is open today. That is what I know, and that is enough. There is something I want to do before we move forward, and I need you to trust me with it for a moment. We just talked about something that can genuinely shift the frequency of your daily experience. Something that thousands of people have used to walk out of the foggy, depleted state of the long season and into a quality of thinking and living that they had stopped believing was still available to them. And I hope that landed for you in the way it was meant to. But I also know that there is the part of you, the honest part, the part that has been carrying the real weight of this journey, that cannot simply receive that information and move on without first being allowed to acknowledge what the waiting has actually taken from you. And I am not willing to skip that part. Not today. Not with you. Because here is what nobody says when they talk about the chosen one's journey. They talk about the destination. They talk about the breakthrough. They talk about the moment when the season turns and the door opens and the thing you have been believing for finally arrives in a form you can touch and hold and show to the people who doubted alongside you. And that moment is real, and it is coming, and we are going to spend real time in it together. But before we get there, I want to sit in the room of what it cost, not to make you smaller, not to rehearse the pain in a way that keeps you tethered to it, but because the chosen one who cannot name what was taken from them cannot fully receive what is being restored. You have to know what you lost before you can appreciate what is being handed back. The years of waiting have taken things from you that were not small. I want to name them one by one, without softening the edges, without immediately reaching for the silver lining, because you deserve to have the loss acknowledged before you are asked to release it. The waiting has taken relationships that should have been built by now. There are connections that should exist in your life, friendships of the deep variety, the kind where someone knows the interior of your story and you know theirs. Partnerships that should have had years to develop into something solid and layered and real. And instead, you have been in a season that required a particular kind of internal focus that does not always leave room for the tending that deep relationships require. You may have watched people around you build the kind of relational infrastructure that seems to come easily to them, the circles, the communities, the networks of mutual support that make hard seasons more bearable. And you have wondered, in the quiet moments, if there is something wrong with the way you do relationships, if your depth is actually a liability in a world that often moves too fast to sit with anything longer than a surface-level exchange. What was taken from you was not your capacity for connection. What was taken was the season in which those connections should have been built. And the toll of that is real, and it deserves to be named. The waiting has taken career ground that you should have covered by now. You have watched people who started at the same point as you move ahead in ways that seem to contradict the evidence of their actual depth or preparation or commitment. You have done the work. You have put in the hours. You have developed skills and perspective and a quality of discernment that takes most people decades to accumulate. And yet the external markers of progress have not kept pace with the internal reality. That gap between who you actually are and what your external circumstances currently reflect is one of the most specific and particular aches of the chosen one in the long season. And it is not an illusion. The gap is real. The distance between your interior and your exterior is real. I am not going to tell you it is not. The waiting has taken from you the freedom to dream without qualification. There was a version of you, earlier, could hold a large vision without immediately following it with a list of reasons it might not work, without the internal voice that has been trained by disappointment to attach conditions to every hope before the hope even fully forms. Somewhere in the long middle of this season, you learned to preempt your own joy, to manage your own expectations so carefully that the dreams began to arrive already shrunken, already apologizing for their size, already asking permission to exist before they had even been fully articulated. That is one of the quietest and most costly forms of damage that the long wait produces. And I want you to know that the recovery of that unqualified dreaming is not naive. It is not irresponsible. It is one of the primary tasks of the season you are entering. The waiting has taken your easy trust in yourself. Not all of it. If it had taken all of it, you would not be here. There is a residual knowing in you that has survived everything the long season has thrown at it. And that residual knowing is precisely what brought you to this message today. But the trust that used to be easy, the trust that did not require constant renewal and constant evidence and constant argument with your own doubt, that has become something you have to work for rather than something that simply lives in you as a natural posture. You have had to fight for your own belief in yourself in a way that is exhausting, and the exhaustion of that fight is part of what has depleted you in ways that go beyond the ordinary tiredness of busy days. I want to sit with all of that for a moment before we move. I want you to let it be real. I want you to resist the impulse to immediately find the gift in it, to immediately construct the narrative of purpose around it, because the narrative of purpose will have its place, and that place is coming. But right now I am just asking you to let it be what it is. Loss, real loss. Loss that happened to a person who did not deserve it in the way that it arrived, and who Harry has carried it with more grace than anyone has properly acknowledged. There is a man in one of the oldest stories in the human tradition, whose name is Joseph. And I am going to tell you about Joseph, but I am not going to tell you the part of his story that ends well. Not yet. Because the part that ends well is not the part that is relevant to where you are right now. What is relevant is the middle. What is relevant is the pit. Joseph was the son of a man named Jacob, and from his earliest years, he carried something that the people around him could sense but could not categorize. A quality, a frequency, a particular relationship to vision and meaning that set him apart in a way that made some people uncomfortable and others hostile. His brothers, the ones who shared his blood and his household, and should have been his closest allies, could not tolerate the specificity of what he carried. And so they made the decision that seems unthinkable from the outside, but makes a terrible kind of sense when you understand how threatening the frequency of the chosen one is to the people who are not yet walking in their own. And they threw him into a pit, and then they sold him. I am not going to rush to the palace. I am not going to jump to the moment when the dream finds its fulfillment, and Joseph stands in a position of authority that vindicates everything he suffered. I am going to stay in the middle, because the middle is where you are, and the middle deserves a witness. Joseph was in a foreign land, working in a household that was not his own, carrying gifts that were not being used for the purpose they were designed for, navigating a system that had no category for what he actually was. And then, when something in his character finally began to be recognized, when a version of belonging and purpose began to form in the only context available to him, that too was taken through false accusation, through injustice, through a betrayal that came from a direction he had not seen coming, and he went from the household to the prison, the pit, the foreign land, the household that was not his, the prison. These are not metaphors I am reaching for to make a point. These are the actual sequence of events in the life of one of the most significant chosen ones in the entire human record. And at no point in that sequence, not in the pit, not in the foreign household, not in the prison cell, did the story announce itself as a story heading towards something great. It announced itself as a story of loss, accumulating on loss, accumulating on loss. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something that the highlight reel version of the chosen one's journey will never show you. The chosen one does not experience their journey as a chosen one while they are in the middle of it. They experience it as a human being who is confused and exhausted and trying to maintain integrity in circumstances that seem designed to erode it. The identity of the chosen one is not something they feel continuously. It is something they return to. It is something they choose again after every loss, every betrayal, every season of the pit, not because the evidence supports it, but because something deeper than evidence insists on it. You have been choosing it again. Every time you showed up for one more day in a season that gave you no guaranteed return on that showing up, you were choosing it again. Every time you did not fully collapse into the bitterness that would have been understandable. Every time you held onto the thread of the knowing, even when the knowing felt like the thinnest and most unreliable thing in your life, you were being Joseph in the pit, which means you were being exactly the person the next chapter of your story requires. The pain was real. What was taken was real. And you are still here. That combination, the reality of the loss and the fact of your continued presence, is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything. I want to give you something now that I believe will change the way you understand everything we have been walking through together. Not a reframe that minimizes what has been lost, because we have already spent real time in the room of the loss, and I am not going to pretend that room does not exist. What I want to give you is a new language, because one of the specific limitations of the long season is that the chosen one is often trying to make sense of a divine experience, using only the vocabulary of ordinary time, and ordinary time does not have the words for what is actually happening to them. Before I go further, I want to do something that I consider essential before offering any framework around time and season to someone in the position you are in. The video you have come to today carries at its center a very specific emotional experience, and I want to name that experience precisely before I offer you any language around it. The emotional core of everything we have been discussing is this. It is the experience of someone who knows they are carrying something real and significant, who has waited long enough that the waiting itself has begun to feel like the answer, who is standing at the edge of either releasing the dream or receiving a new understanding that makes the dream survivable for another season. That is the center. That is what this is about. And from the full landscape of ancient concepts of time and sacred season, the two that speak most directly and most honestly to that specific experience are these. The first is the concept that the ancient Greeks called kairos, which I will explain in a moment. The second is a word from the ancient Hebrew tradition, the word kava, which has been translated as waiting, but means something far more active and far more structural than that translation suggests. I chose these two specifically because kairos addresses the nature of the moment you are currently standing in, and kava addresses the nature of what you have been doing in the years that brought you here. Together, they form a complete picture of a journey that ordinary clock time simply does not have the resolution to capture. Let me begin with kairos, because this is the concept I need you to carry with you through everything that follows in this message. The ancient Greeks had two completely different words for time, and the distinction between them is one of the most important things a chosen one in a long season can understand. The first word was chronos. Chronos is the time you measure with clocks and calendars. It is sequential, linear, one moment following the next in an unbroken chain of befores and afters. Chronos is the time your employer measures your hours in. It is the time the doctor uses when they tell you recovery takes 6 to 8 weeks. It is the time your mind uses when it says you have been waiting for 3 years, or 5 years, or a decade, and calculates that against some invisible deadline and concludes that you are behind. Chronos is not bad. Chronos is necessary. But chronos is not the only kind of time that exists, and it is not the kind of time that governs the unfolding of a chosen one's destiny. The second word was kairos. And kairos does not mean a moment on the clock. Kairos means the right moment, the appointed moment, the moment that has been prepared for and that carries within it a specific quality of readiness that cannot be manufactured by simply accumulating enough chronos hours. Ancient Greek writers used the word kairos to describe the moment in archery when the tension of the bow, the position of the target, the stillness of the air, and the readiness of the archer all converge into a single window of perfect release. Miss that window by a second in either direction, and the arrow does not find its mark. Hit that window and the arrow travels with a precision that no amount of force alone could achieve. This is what I need you to understand about where you are standing right now. You have been measuring your journey in chronos, counting the months and the years, calculating the distance between where you are and where you thought you would be by now, and concluding from that calculation that you are delayed. But the story of your life is not being written in chronos. It is being written in kairos, and in kairos, you are not behind. You are not late. You are not a person whose timeline has slipped. You are an arrow whose bow has been drawn to exactly the right tension, who is waiting in exactly the right stillness, and the kairos window is not something you missed. It is something you are entering. This is not positioning as reward for effort. I want to be precise about that, because the chosen one in the long season has often been offered a version of this idea that feels like a transaction, that says if you work hard enough and believe long enough and do the right things, then the timing will come good. That is not what kairos means. Kairos is not a prize. It is a positioning. And the difference is everything, because a prize can be earned or lost depending on your performance. but a positioning is established by a wisdom larger than your own performance record. The Kairos moment arrives, not because you finally did enough to deserve it, but because the convergence of all the factors, including the ones you cannot see and did not control, has reached its appointed completion. Now let me give you the second word, because this one is going to reach into the specific texture of the years you have been carrying. In the ancient Hebrew tradition, there is a word that appears in some of the most profound texts about sustaining faith through impossible seasons. The word is kapha, and in most translations, it is rendered simply as wait. Wait upon the Lord, wait for the promise. But that translation, while not wrong, is so incomplete that it actually obscures the most important thing about the word. Kava does not mean passive waiting. It does not mean sitting in a chair hoping something will happen. The root of the word kava is the image of strands of fiber being twisted together to form a rope. The ancient understanding of this word is the act of braiding, of twisting separate threads around each other, under tension until they form something that is structurally stronger than any of the individual strands could be alone. When the ancient texts say kava, they are not saying sit still and wait. They are saying allow the tensions of the season to braid what is inside you into something that has a structural strength it did not have before. Every year of this season, every disappointment that you survived, every moment where you chose to stay in the story rather than walk out of it, every day where you maintained your integrity in circumstances that did not reward you for doing so. These were not wasted years. These were not years where nothing happened. These were strands being twisted together under tension. This is kava, and the rope that is forming inside you because of the years of kava is not a metaphor. It is the actual structural resource that the next chapter of your life is going to require. You have not been delayed. You have been braided. And the braiding is not finished yet, but it is closer to completion than you know. I want to bring these two concepts together now in a way that I hope will settle something in you that has been unsettled for a long time. Kairos moment. The appointed window of precise release requires a specific quality of readiness in the arrow, and that readiness is not achieved by the arrow trying harder. It is achieved by the bow doing its work, by the tension doing its work, by the kava doing its work over the time it requires. You have not been waiting passively in an empty room, hoping the door would open. You have been in the workshop. You have been on the loom. You have been in the process of becoming something that has the structural integrity to carry what the next season is going to place in your hands. There is another layer to this that I want to give you, because the language of sacred time goes deeper than these two concepts alone. And I believe you are ready for the depth. There is what the ancient traditions call the wilderness season. And the wilderness is not a metaphor I use lightly, because the wilderness in the ancient texts is a specific and recognizable experience. It is the season of apparent lostness that precedes elevation. It is the season of stripping away, of removing the attachments and dependencies and false foundations that would have compromised the structure of everything that comes after. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he stood at the burning bush. The people of Israel spent 40 years in the desert between slavery and the promised land. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before his public ministry began. In every case, the wilderness was not a detour. It was the direct route. The wilderness was the preparation that could not be compressed or bypassed without compromising the integrity of what came after it. If you have been in a wilderness season, if your life has had the quality of the desert, stripped of the markers of progress and achievement that would have told you which direction was forward, If you have had the disorienting experience of being in a place where the usual methods of navigation no longer seem to work, I need you to hear this with everything I have. The wilderness is not your address. It is your preparation room. And the preparation room is not where you live. It is where you are being made ready for the place where you are going to live. The wilderness does not strip you to punish you. It strips you to reveal what is actually there beneath the layers of performance and strategy and self-protection that you accumulated in the seasons before it. And what is beneath those layers? What the wilderness has been uncovering in you through its long and sometimes brutal process of removal is a quality of character and a depth of knowing and a structural integrity that cannot be manufactured in comfortable conditions. The wilderness produces what comfort cannot, and what it produces in you is exactly what the next chapter requires. Ban Kombi Chi Huan, Ban Dang Duk Lapsrap. And the assembly is the work of a precision that your Chronos mind cannot fully track, but your Kairos spirit already recognizes. The tension you have been feeling is not the tension of something going wrong. It is the tension of the bow at full draw, which means the release is not far. The kava of your years is not wasted strand. It is the rope that is going to hold the weight of everything the next season places in your hands. Type the words, I receive it, in the comments below. If something in these ancient words has landed in a place that feels like recognition, like a language you have been waiting for someone to speak to you directly, you are not in the wilderness because you are lost. You are in the wilderness because you are being prepared, and the preparation, however long and however costly, is almost complete. Something is shifting. I want you to feel that before I say anything else, because the shift is not coming. It is not approaching from a distance. It is not something you are going to experience eventually if you hold on long enough. The shift is already in motion. Right now, in this moment, while you are listening to these words, there are things moving in the invisible architecture of your life that your physical eyes cannot yet detect, but that your spirit has already begun to register as a change in atmospheric pressure. You have felt it. That is partly why you are here. The chosen one does not stumble into the message that names their season. They are drawn to it by the same frequency that is already beginning to reorganize the circumstances around them. What I want to do in this section is give you the specific shape of what is coming. Not in vague spiritual language that sounds beautiful but lands nowhere concrete. Not in the kind of broad, general promise that could apply to anyone and therefore lands with the weight of nothing in particular. I want to give you the actual texture of what the shift looks like in 3 specific areas of your life, the 3 areas that the long season has most significantly affected. Because the restoration that is beginning will be proportional to the depth of the cost. What was taken most significantly will be returned most visibly. That is not wishful thinking. That is the consistent pattern of the Chosen One's story across every tradition, every culture, every era of human history that has taken the trouble to record it. The first area is your inner world, the landscape of what you feel, what you sense, what you know at the level that sit deep words and logic and reasonable explanation. This is the area I want to start with because it is the area the shift begins in. And if you do not know what to look for inside yourself, you will miss the early signs that something is changing before the external evidence arrives. Here is what is coming in your inner world. There is a clarity that is beginning to form, like water that has been stirred settling back into transparency. For a long time, the noise of the long season, the chronic low-level stress of it, the accumulated weight of sustained uncertainty, has created a kind of inner static that made it difficult to hear your own knowing. You have been making decisions from a place of depletion rather than from the deep, quiet, certain place that is your actual center of gravity. That is changing. The clarity that is coming is not the dramatic sudden certainty of a lightning bolt moment, though those do happen and you may experience one. It is more often the quiet return of an inner voice that you recognize as your own, but that has been muffled for so long you had almost forgotten its particular quality. You are going to begin waking up in the morning with thoughts that feel different from the anxious circling of the last season. They are going to feel more like direction and less like noise. They are going to feel like someone turned down the static and you can finally hear the signal again. What you should not do in this phase is second-guess the clarity when it arrives. The chosen one, who has been in a long season of confusion, has often developed a habit of distrusting their own knowing, because the long season trained them to be cautious, to hold their instincts at arm's length until they could be verified by external evidence. But the clarity that is coming in this next season is trustworthy in a way that the beta state noise of the last season was not. When you feel the inner knowing returning, when a decision suddenly seems clear in a way that does not require argument, when a direction emerges that has a quality of peace rather than pressure, I want you to practice trusting it. Not recklessly, not without discernment, but without the automatic reflex of doubt that the last season installed in you. What you can trust in this area is that the inner voice that has survived everything the long season threw at it is not naive. It has been tested. It has been refined. It has been through the kava process that we talked about in the last section, what comes out. And what comes out of that process is not fragile. It is the strongest version of your knowing that has ever existed inside you, and it is ready to be trusted. The second area is your relational landscape, and this is the area where the shift will be most visible and most surprising, because the changes that are coming in your relationships will arrive in ways and from directions that your rational planning mind would not have predicted. Here is the specific shape of what is coming. People who have been in your life in a particular capacity are going to begin to naturally find their way to a different distance from you. Not through conflict, not through dramatic rupture in most cases, but through a quiet and organic reorganization that reflects the fact that you are stepping into a different frequency than the one that connected you to those particular relationships. This is not rejection and it is not loss, even though it may feel disorienting at first. It is alignment. The chosen one at the beginning of a new season cannot carry the full relational weight of the previous season into the new one, because the new season requires a quality of connection that some of the previous relationships were never designed to provide. Let them go with love. Let them find the distance they need to find. The space they leave is not going to stay empty. Because here is the other part of what is coming in the relational area. There are people who are already moving towards you from directions you cannot currently see. People whose frequency matches the frequency you are stepping into. People who will recognize something in you that the previous season's relationships could not fully see, because those people were operating at a level that the previous context did not have access to. These new connections will not feel like the effortful, slightly off quality of relationships that were built in the wrong season. They will feel like recognition. They will feel like coming home to a place you have never been. And when they arrive, and they are going to arrive, you will understand why the reorganization of the previous relational landscape was not punishment, but preparation. What you should not do in this relational season is try to hold on to what is naturally releasing or try to force new connections before they arrive organically. The chosen one in this phase sometimes, out of the fear that the space left by departing relationships will never be filled, tries to grip tighter to what is leaving, or tries to manufacture new connections from a place of scarcity rather than waiting for the connections that are genuinely aligned to find their natural way in. Do not grip. Do not manufacture. Trust that the relational architecture of your next season is already being assembled with a precision that your strategic mind could not improve on. What you can trust in the relational area is that the people who belong in the next chapter of your story are already in motion toward you. You do not have to chase them. You do not have to perform for them. You do not have to become a different version of yourself to attract them. The frequency you carry, the refined and strengthened frequency of the chosen one who has come through the long season, is itself the signal that will draw the right people at the right time. The third area is opportunity and resource. And this is the area that the rational practica part of you most wants to hear about, because the long season has often involved a very concrete experience of limitation, of not having access to the material and practical resources that your gifts and your efforts should reasonably have generated by now. I want to speak to that directly. Hear what is coming in the area of opportunity and resource. The experience of fighting for every inch, of pushing against resistance that never seemed to let up, of working harder than the results seemed to justify. That particular quality of friction is going to begin to change. Not all at once, not overnight in most cases, but the nature of how opportunity arrives in your life is going to shift from a quality of straining to a quality of alignment. Things are going to begin to fit in ways they did not fit before. Doors are going to open without the amount of force that every door in the previous season seemed to require. This is not luck. This is what it looks like when the Kairos moment that we talked about in the previous section actually arrives, and the arrow finally releases from a bow that has been at full tension for a very long time. The arrow does not have to work to travel once it is released. The work was done in the drawing. The release is the fruit of all that. Tension, not more tension. What you should not do in this area is immediately fill every opening opportunity with frantic activity, as though the window might close again before you can get enough through it. The scarcity posture of the long season trained you to grab for what was available because available was rare. The next season does not operate on scarcity. It operates on sufficiency and surplus, and the posture that serves you in a season of surplus is very different from the posture that kept you alive in a season of scarcity. When the opportunities begin to arrive, and they are already beginning to move toward you, receive them with discernment rather than desperation. Not every open door belongs to you, but the ones that carry the quality of peace alongside the quality of promise, those are yours. You will know the difference because the long season has given you a discernment that people who have not been through it simply do not have access to. What you can trust in this area is that your portion is being prepared with a specificity that generic opportunity cannot match. You are not waiting for whatever becomes available. You are moving toward what has been prepared for you, and the difference between those two things is the difference between taking whatever you can get and receiving what was made with your particular name on it. If you are feeling the shift in any of these three areas, if something in your inner world, your relational landscape, or your experience of opportunity and resource is beginning to move in ways that feel different from the long static quality of the previous season, then I want you to mark this moment. Type the words "I am stepping in the comments below, not as a declaration of arrival, because the arrival is still unfolding. but as a declaration of willingness. The chosen one at the threshold of a new season does not wait for full certainty before they put their foot across the line. They step in with the knowing they have, and the knowing grows with every step they take. Type "I am stepping in" and let it be the sound of a chosen one who has survived the long season and is ready, not perfectly, not without questions, but genuinely and irrevocably ready for what comes next. There is a word I want to give you now, a name for who you are on the other side of everything you have walked through. Not a title that floats above you like something you have to grow into eventually, but a description of who you already are right now, in this moment, formed by every hard thing the long season asked of you, and every time you chose to stay in the story anyway. Before I give you the name, I want to do something that requires your full presence for just a moment. I want to invite you into a picture, not a fantasy, not a wish, a recognition. Picture yourself standing at a threshold. Not a metaphorical threshold in the vague sense, but a specific one. There is a doorframe in front of you, and on one side of it is every season you have already lived through. Every version of yourself that had to be revised by reality. Every expectation that did not survive contact with what actually happened. Every relationship that ended before you were ready for it to end. Every door that stayed closed when you knocked. Every night that went too long. Every morning you woke up and chose, without ceremony and without guarantee, to keep going. All of it is on that side of the doorframe. It is not gone. You are not erasing it. It is part of the architecture of who you are, and it goes with you wherever you go. But it stays on that side of the threshold. On the other side of the doorframe is the season that is beginning. Not the finished version of it. Not the version where everything has already resolved and the story is complete, and you can see the whole shape of what was being built. Just the beginning of it. The first light of it, the first morning of it. And the question the threshold is asking you is not whether you are ready in the sense of being without wounds, or without questions, or without the residue of the long season still present in your body and your memory. The question is simply whether you are willing to put one foot across the line, whether you are willing to let the threshold be real. Now I want you to notice something. As you stand in that picture, as you hold that image of the doorframe with the past on one side and the beginning of what is next on the other, notice where you are already positioned. You are already at the threshold. You are already standing in the doorframe. You did not get here by accident, and you did not get here by being perfect. You got here by surviving what the long season asked you to survive, and by continuing to show up for a story that did not always make it easy to believe it was worth showing up for. And here you are, at the threshold, already. The name I want to give you is this. You are a cycle breaker. And I want to explain what that means, with the precision it deserves, because cycle breaker is not a motivational label. It is a functional description of something that is actually happening through you, whether you have been aware of it or not. A cycle breaker is someone whose life marks the end of a generational pattern and the beginning of a new one. The patterns that have run through families, through communities, through inherited ways of relating to the world and to each other and to possibility itself, patterns of limitation, of fear, of contracted vision, of relationships that repeated the same damage in slightly different forms across multiple generations. These patterns do not end on their own. They require someone willing to hold the tension of the break, to be the person in whom the old pattern meets resistance for the first time, to absorb the friction of that resistance in their own life without passing the pattern forward. That friction is not comfortable. It is, in fact, one of the primary sources of the specific kind of pain that the chosen one in the long season carries. The pain of being the one who breaks a pattern without necessarily having the language for what they are doing or the community of people around them who understand it. You have been breaking cycles. You have been the one in whom inherited patterns of limitation have met a resistance that they did not meet in the generations before you. The long season, with all of its cost and all of its weight, has been in part the experience of that friction. The old pattern pushing back against the new frequency that you carry. And you have held the line, not perfectly, not without moments of reverting to what was familiar. But you have held the line enough that the pattern is breaking. And the patterns that break in you do not pass forward to the people who come after you. The children in your story, biological or otherwise, the younger ones who are watching how you navigate this season, the people whose lives touch yours in ways you may not even be fully aware of, they will inherit a different starting point because of what you have held in your body and your choices and your sustained refusal to let the old patterns have the final word. This is not a small thing. This is, in many ways, the most significant thing. Because the legacy of the cycle breaker is not measured in personal achievement, though personal achievement will come. It is measured in what does not happen to the people who come after them, the harm that does not repeat, the pattern that does not continue, the new thing that becomes possible because one person was willing to be the hinge point between what was and what is coming. Now I want to give you a specific practice for this moment at the threshold, because the cycle breaker does not simply stand at the doorframe and think about it. The cycle breaker takes the step, and the step requires releasing what is being carried on the wrong side of the threshold. So I want to walk you through something very simple and very real. I want you to think, right now, about the specific weight you have been carrying that belongs on the other side of the threshold. Not all of it at once. Just the heaviest piece, the one that you reach for most automatically in the quiet moments, the fear that speaks most loudly, the doubt that has the most consistent access to your inner dialogue. You know what it is. You probably felt it stir when I said the words heaviest piece just now. That response, that slight tightening, or that immediate knowing is your awareness already identifying it. I want you to imagine, in the picture of the threshold that we have been building together, that you are holding that weight in your hands. Physically imagine the weight of it, the size and shape and texture of it, and I want you to imagine, very deliberately, setting it down. Not throwing it away in a gesture of dramatic rejection, not pretending it does not exist or that it was not real. Simply setting it down, placing it on the ground on the side of the threshold where it belongs, which is the side that contains the past, the side that contains what was, the side that you are in the process of stepping away from. You are not abandoning what it taught you. You are not pretending it did not happen. You are simply deciding that it does not cross the threshold with you. It stays here. And you move forward, carrying the wisdom it produced in you without the weight of it pulling you backward. Take a breath with that. Let it be real for a moment before we continue. The cycle breaker who stands at the threshold and sets down the heaviest weight is not demonstrating that they have overcome everything. They are demonstrating that they are willing to begin without everything being resolved first. And that willingness, that specific quality of courage that does not require complete healing before it takes the first step, is one of the defining characteristics of the chosen one in the moment of their crossing. I want to speak a specific blessing over you now, in the way that a blessing is meant to work, which is not as a wish from a distance, but as a declaration over something that is already true. These words are not for a future version of you. They are for the version that is standing at the threshold right now. May the clarity that has been forming in the long season arrive in your mornings with the quality of direction rather than noise. May the relationships that are moving toward you find you in a state of openness that allows you to recognize them without the filter of the previous season's disappointments. May the opportunities that carry your name on them arrive in a form that your discernment can recognize and your courage can receive. May the cycles that end in you produce a new beginning in the people whose lives your life touches. May the weight you set down at the threshold stay where you leave it. And may the lightness that comes from setting it down be something you wake up to every morning for the rest of this season. May the cycle breaker in you know that the breaking was never the end of the story. It was always the beginning of the new one. And may the threshold you are standing at right now be exactly what it is, which is not a line between your pain and your relief, but a line between who the long season made you and who the next season is going to reveal you to have already become. You are a cycle breaker. You are standing at the threshold, and the other side of the doorframe is not empty. It is full of everything the long season was preparing you to receive. Step in. The ground on the other side is solid. It has been prepared for the weight of someone who has walked through everything you have walked through and arrived, still standing at exactly this moment. I want to talk to you now about what you actually do, not what you believe, not what you feel, not what you are beginning to sense in the atmospheric shift of the season that is opening around you, but what you do with your hands and your feet and your hours in the days that are immediately in front of you. Because the chosen one at the threshold is not served by beautiful language alone, however true and however needed that language has been. The chosen one at the threshold needs a direction. They need something concrete enough to carry into the morning, something that translates the interior awakening into an exterior movement, however small that movement is at first. And I want to start by saying something that might surprise you, given everything we have been building toward together in this message. The action I am asking you to take right now is not large. It is not a complete overhaul of your life. It is not a dramatic gesture of faith that requires you to burn what you have built and leap into the unknown. The chosen one in the early days of a new season does not need to take enormous steps. They need to take the right step. And the right step is almost always smaller than the size of the vision would suggest it should be. The vision is large. The first step is specific. And the specificity of the first step is what makes it real rather than theoretical. So let's talk about the three areas that are shifting, the ones we walked through in the last section, and let us get specific about what the right action looks like in each one right now, today, in the actual circumstances of your actual life. The first area is your relational landscape, and the action here has two parts that move in opposite directions simultaneously. The first part of the action is the releasing. I want you to think of one relationship in your life right now that has been costing you more than it has been contributing, not in the cold transactional sense of measuring what you get versus what you give, but in the deeper sense of whether the connection is drawing you toward the person you are becoming or anchoring you to a version of yourself that belongs on the other side of the threshold. You know which relationship I am talking about. It surfaced in your awareness the moment I began describing it, because the chosen one always knows. They just often postpone the knowing, because the releasing feels like loss before it reveals itself as liberation. The action is not necessarily to end the relationship dramatically or to have a difficult confrontation today. Sometimes the action is simply to stop over-investing in a connection that is not reciprocating at the level you have been giving. Sometimes the action is to create a small, deliberate space, a little distance, a slight reduction in the energy you pour into something that is not filling in proportion to what it is drawing. Sometimes the action is simply to acknowledge internally, with honesty and without judgment, that this connection is not aligned with the season you are entering, and to stop trying to force it into a shape it was never designed to take. The second part of the relational action is the opening. I want you to think of one person in your life who represents a connection that you have been meaning to deepen but have allowed the busyness and the depletion of the long season to keep at a surface level. One person whose frequency you recognize as aligned with the direction you are moving, but with whom you have not yet made the investment of genuine depth. And I want you to reach out to that person today, not with a grand gesture, not with a lengthy explanation. Just a simple, honest reaching out that says in whatever words feel natural to you that you have been thinking of them and that you value what the connection between you has the potential to become. That is the whole action. One releasing, one opening, two movements in opposite directions that together begin to reorganize the relational architecture of the new season. The second area is your sense of purpose, and the question that has been sitting at the center of this area for the long season is the one that sounds like this. What am I supposed to be doing? Not as a philosophical inquiry, but as a genuine and sometimes desperate practical question. The question of the chosen one who can feel the size of what they carry, but cannot yet see clearly the specific form in which it is meant to be expressed in the world. And I want to offer you a reframe of that question, because I think the question itself has been part of what has made the answer feel so elusive. The question, what am I supposed to be doing, is a question about destination. It is looking for the full picture, the complete answer, the finished form of the purpose. And the full picture is almost never available at the beginning of the new season. What is available? What is always available to the chosen one who is willing to look closely enough at the immediate texture of their present moment is a single next step, not the whole staircase, just the next step. So the action in the area of purpose is this. I want you to identify one thing that you already know how to do that is in genuine service to someone other than yourself. And I want you to do that thing today. It does not have to be large. It does not have to be related to the ultimate vision of your purpose in any obvious way. It can be as simple as a conversation that you have been meaning to have, a skill you possess that someone in your immediate circle needs, a word of encouragement or clarity or practical assistance that is within your capacity to give right now. The reason this action matters is not because it will immediately resolve the question of your ultimate purpose. It is because purpose is not found by looking for it. Purpose is found by moving in the direction of service and allowing the movement itself to clarify the path. The chosen one who waits for the full picture of their purpose before they begin to move will wait indefinitely, because the full picture is assembled step by step rather than revealed all at once. Take one step of service today. Let it be small enough to actually do, and then notice what it reveals about the direction of the next step. That is how purpose unfolds for the chosen one in the new season. Not as a sudden total clarity, but as a progressive illumination, one step at a time, each step making the next one visible. The third area is resource and opportunity, and the action here is perhaps the most counterintuitive of the three, because it runs directly against the instinct that the long season installed in you. The instinct of the long season is to hold tightly to what is available, because available has been scarce. The instinct of the long season is to calculate carefully before committing, to protect against loss because loss has been a familiar experience, to keep one hand on the emergency exit because exits have been necessary before. These instincts served you in the season that produced them. They kept you safe when safety required caution. But they are not the instincts that serve the chosen one in the season of open doors. Because the posture of scarcity closes the hand that needs to be open to receive what is being offered. The action in the area of resource is this. I want you to identify one area of your life where you have been operating from a posture of scarcity, where the fear of not having enough has been shaping your decisions in ways that have actually been limiting the flow of what is trying to reach you. And I want you to take one small deliberate action of generosity in that area today, not a reckless action that ignores your genuine practical circumstances, but a conscious, deliberate act of giving in the specific area where you have been holding most tightly. Because the principle that every wisdom tradition across every culture and every era of human history has consistently identified is this: the hand that gives is the hand that receives. The life that flows outward creates the current that draws more in. Generosity is not the luxury of people who have more than enough. It is the practice that shifts the frequency from scarcity to sufficiency, and it is available to the chosen one even in the middle of the season that has felt most limited. Give something today in the area where you have been holding most tightly. It does not have to be money, though it can be. It can be time, or attention, or expertise, or encouragement, or the specific thing that you have been protecting most carefully, because the long season taught you that it was finite and precious. Give a portion of it deliberately and consciously, and notice what happens to the quality of your inner experience in the hours after you do. Now I want to bring all three of these actions together into a single picture, because they are not three separate practices. They are three expressions of the same fundamental movement, the movement from the posture of the long season into the posture of the new one. Release what is not aligned, open to what is. Move in service rather than waiting for the full picture. Give in the area of greatest fear. These are the actions of the cycle breaker at the threshold. These are the movements of the chosen one who has understood that the threshold is not just something you stand at. It is something you cross, and crossing it requires the specific kind of courage that does not feel like courage from the inside. It does not feel dramatic or certain or accompanied by the internal fanfare that you might expect from a moment this significant. From the inside, the crossing of a threshold usually feels like simply deciding to take a step that you have been standing in front of for longer than you want to admit. It feels ordinary. It feels small. And then, looking back from a later vantage point, you will understand that the ordinary smallness of the step was exactly proportionate to the magnitude of what it opened. There is one more thing I want to say in this section, and it connects back to something we talked about when we discussed the genius wave and the specific neurological state that the chosen one needs to access in order to operate from the clarity and the creativity and the intuitive knowing that this new season requires. The practices I have just described, the releasing, the opening, the serving, the giving, these are behavioral actions. They shift your external posture. But the genius wave does something complementary that these behavioral actions alone cannot accomplish. It shifts the internal frequency at the neurological level, creating the conditions in your brain where the clarity that informs the right action can gently hover above the static of the beta state, that the long season has kept your nervous system locked in. The behavioral action and the neurological shift work together the way that two hands work together. One without the other is functional but limited. Both together create a quality of integrated action that the chosen one in the new season needs to be operating from. The 7 minutes of the genius wave prepares the ground that the behavioral actions plant into, and the behavioral actions give the inner shift somewhere to land in the concrete reality of your daily life. The link is in the pinned comment below. It is there for the chosen one who is ready to take both the inner and the outer step at the same time. You do not have to choose between the spiritual and the practical, between the internal shift and the external action. You never did. The genius of the chosen journey is that these two dimensions of the crossing have always been meant to happen together. Type the words "I am crossing over" in the comments below if this section has given you something you are going to carry into tomorrow. Let the comment be a marker. Let it be the place in the record of your days where you can look back later and say, "This is where I decided. This is where the crossing began." We have come a long way together, and I do not use that phrase lightly or as a formality to mark the approaching end of something. I use it because I am genuinely aware of what it means to have walked through everything this message has asked you to walk through with me. We went into the room of the loss. We sat in the cost of the long season without rushing past it. We named what was taken, and we gave the taking its proper weight. We talked about Joseph in the pit without jumping to the palace, because the pit deserved a witness before the throne was even mentioned. We gave the years of waiting a language that ordinary clock time could never have provided, the kairos precision of the appointed moment, the kava braiding of the long tension into structural strength. We stood at the threshold together, and we named you for what you are: a cycle breaker, a person in whom a generational pattern is ending and a new thing is beginning. And then we got practical, because beautiful language that does not translate into a next step is just decoration. And you did not come this far to be decorated. You came this far to be equipped. So before I say what I need to say in this final section, I want to acknowledge something specific about you. Not about the chosen one in general, not about the category of people this message was designed to find, but about you individually and personally. The fact that you are still here, that you stayed with this message through all of its depth and all of its honesty, and all of the places where it asked you to feel things you might have preferred to stay above. That is not a small thing. Most people do not stay. Most people encounter the first moment of genuine discomfort in a piece of content and find a reason to step back from it. You did not step back. You showed up and you stayed present, and in a season where showing up has often felt like the most expensive thing you had to offer, that means something real. I want you to hear this directly. You are not alone in what you have been carrying. I know that the long season has had a particular quality of isolation to it, the specific loneliness we talked about in the early sections, the loneliness of carrying a depth that your immediate context often could not fully hold, the loneliness of knowing something is coming that you cannot yet see, and that the people around you cannot always feel with you. That isolation has been real. But right now, in this moment, I want you to understand something that I believe at the level where I hold the things I am most certain of. All across the world, other chosen ones are walking into this exact same message, not as a figure of speech. Literally, there are people on different continents, different languages, in different circumstances that look nothing like yours on the surface, but carry beneath the surface the same frequency, the same long season, the same unrelinquished knowing, the same ache of the threshold not yet crossed, and they are here too, in this message, alongside you. You are in a room that is larger than you can see from where you are standing. And not one person in that room arrived here by accident. I want to give you one final practice before I close, because the chosen one who leaves a message like this one, without a concrete action to perform, is the chosen one who lets the emotional resonance of the experience dissipate before it can become something structural in their life. The experience of resonance is real, and it is valuable, but it is not the same as transformation. And transformation requires a moment of decision, a point at which the interior shift is anchored to something external and real. So here is the final practice, and it is connected to the threshold exercise that we moved through in the last section, but it takes it one step further. I want you to find a quiet moment today after this message ends. It does not have to be a long moment. 5 minutes is enough, and in that quiet moment, I want you to do something physical, because the body needs to participate in the crossing of a threshold, not just the mind and the spirit. I want you to find a piece of paper, and I want you to write down, in whatever words feel most honest and most yours, the name of the heaviest thing you are leaving on the other side of the threshold. The fear that has spoken most loudly, the doubt that had the most consistent access to your inner dialogue, the specific weight that has been riding in your chest through the long season. Write it down, not to give it more power, but to make the setting down of it real and physical and witnessed by the version of you who is doing the writing. And then I want you to set the paper aside, face down, in a place where you can return to it if you choose to, or leave it where it is if you do not. Because the act of writing it down and placing it face down is a physical declaration that says, this is not the thing I am carrying forward. This is the thing I am leaving at the threshold. And that declaration, small and simple as it is, does something in the nervous system that thinking about releasing cannot do alone. It makes the releasing real in the body, and the body needs to know what the spirit has decided. After you do that, I want you to take 7 minutes of silence. You know why 7 minutes. We talked about it, and the science of it, and what Dr. James Rivers discovered about the minimum effective window for the brain to begin shifting out of the beta state and into the theta and gamma frequencies, where your most profound resources live. If you have the genius wave, this is a good moment to use it, to let the precisely calibrated audio do what 30 years of research designed it to do, to guide your brain gently and naturally into the state where clarity is not something you have to fight for, but something that simply arrives when the conditions are right. If the genius wave has been finding you throughout this message, if something in you has been saying yes to it at the level where you know the things you know, before you have all the reasons, then the link in the pinned comment below is still there. It is still available. The 90-day guarantee is still in place. The price of $39 is still the price. The only thing that changes is time, and the Kairos window that is open right now is not something I can guarantee will remain open past the moment you are currently in. But I want to say something about that without pressure and without the language of manufactured urgency. The genius wave is a tool, and tools are only useful to the person who picks them up. If it is for you, you will know. And if you know, the pinned comment is where you go. If it is not for you right now, then everything else in this message is still yours to carry. The threshold protocol, the 3 steps, the releasing and the opening, and the serving and the giving, the name cycle breaker, the language of Kairos and Kava, and the wilderness that prepares rather than punishes. All of it is yours regardless. Now I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it in the spirit in which it is genuinely meant, which is not as a performance of generosity, but as a real request from someone who believes in the specific person this message was sent to find. If this message reached you today in the place where you actually are, not the place you perform publicly, but the place you actually inhabit in the quiet of your own experience, then I want to ask you to share it with one person, not with everyone, not as a social media gesture, with one specific person whose face has come to mind at some point during this message, the one whose presence in your thoughts while you were listening was not random. The chosen one recognizes another chosen one, and the person who surfaced in your awareness belongs in this room. Sending them this message is an act of the cycle breaker, someone who does not hoard what they have received, but allows it to flow outward in the direction of the people whose lives touch theirs. And if this message has been genuinely nourishing to you, if you have found in it a quality of sustenance that is different from ordinary content, then I want to invite you to like it and to subscribe, not as a transaction, but as a way of saying that this kind of depth is the kind of content you want to keep finding in your days. The algorithm learns what you value from the signals you send it. Send it the signal that depth is what you are here for. If you feel moved to support the work that makes messages like this one possible, there is a way to do that in the description below. I will not make it a condition of anything or attach it to a promise about what it will return to you. I will simply say that the work of reaching chosen ones who are in their long season, of finding the people who need someone to name what they are carrying before they do a give up on the story, that work has a cost, and any support you offer makes it possible to do. More of it. Give what feels right. Give nothing if nothing feels right. Either way, you are welcome here. What I want to leave you with, as the last thing I say before the closing of this message, is this. You did not come here because you were desperate. You came here because something in you is still alive and still oriented toward the truth of who you are, and that something knew that this message was for it. The part of you that stays alive through a long season, when everything else has felt depleted or uncertain or just enormously heavy, that part is not naive. It is not fragile. It is not the weak part of you clinging to comfort. It is the strongest part of you, the part that has survived the pit and the foreign household and the prisons and cell, and is still, after all of it, oriented toward the palace. Not because the palace is the point, but because the story is finished, and the chosen one whose story is not finished has a responsibility to the people whose lives will be different because they kept going. Keep going. The season has turned. The frequency is shifting. The cycle breaker is at the threshold, and the ground on the other side is solid. And it is ready, and it has been waiting for exactly the one who has walked through everything you have walked through. You are not almost there. You are already in the crossing.